ABC. This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. President Bush made public today the man he wants to be the next Supreme Court Justice. His name is Clarance Thomas, a federal appeals court judge born in southern poverty when segregation was still the law of the land. It is only 4 days since Thurgood Marshall announced his retirement from the Supreme Court. Judge Thomas presents quite a contrast. Justice Marshall was the court's oldest member, 83 tomorrow. Judge Thomas, 43, would be its youngest. Justice Marshall was the only black ever on the court and the most liberal. Judge Thomas is a black conservative. We begin with the announcement and ABC's Britt Hume.
The president had gone with the man aides believe he wanted to appoint from the start. The final step was a meeting with Thomas today in the privacy of the bedroom of the Bush home here. Thomas had earlier been Mr. Bush's first nominee to the esteemed U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. He rose from dirt-poor beginnings in South Georgia, where he was raised by his grandparents and by the nuns at the parochial schools he attended.
Judge Thomas's life is a model for all Americans, and he's earned the right to sit on this nation's highest court, and I am very proud indeed to nominate him for this position.
Thomas, a conservative with strong views at odds with much of the civil rights community on affirmative action, among other issues, declined to discuss his views today. But he did express, with some difficulty, his feelings of gratitude to those he said had helped him along the way.
Especially my grandparents, my mother, and the nuns, all of whom were adamant that I grow up to make something of myself.
Thomas will be controversial, especially to civil rights activists who find his views particularly distasteful in a fellow black. But his race could make it awkward for them to oppose him. Mr. Bush insisted race did not influence his selection.
I kept my word to the American people and to the Senate by picking the best man for the job on the merits. And the fact he's minority, so much the better.
Judge, what do you say to critics who say the only reason you're being picked is because you're black?
I think a lot worse things have been said. I disagree with that, but I'll have to live with it.
This nomination signals confrontation, not concession, to the president's opponents on race and civil rights. They are already stung by his quotas argument against their civil rights bill, and now he's sending them a nominee who may be black, but who agrees with him on quotas and a lot more. Peter?
Britt Hume up at Kennebunkport. Stand by for a moment. We have a question for you. A year ago, President Bush's first appointment to the Supreme Court, David Souter, was called the stealth nominee because so little was known about him. Not so with Clarance Thomas. President Reagan appointed him to a top civil rights job 10 years ago, and his views on civil rights issues became very public and very controversial very quickly. Here's our law correspondent, Tim O'Brien.
Most of the controversy over Clarance Thomas stems from his stormy 8-year tenure as head of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. There, he forcefully opposed affirmative action, saying it hurt minorities by encouraging them to rely on government help. He called it a narcotic of dependency, not an ethic of responsibility and independence. One prominent black legal scholar called Thomas's nomination to the Supreme Court insulting.
That to place a person who looks black and who, in conservative terms, thinks white, is an insult.
In 1989, 14 House Democrats urged President Bush not to appoint Thomas to the Court of Appeals, writing that he had demonstrated an overall disdain for the rule of law as head of the EEOC. They said Thomas had allowed thousands of age discrimination cases to lapse, requiring Congress to pass a special law extending the time for claims to be heard. The American Bar Association gave Thomas only a lukewarm endorsement. Despite all that, he breezed through Senate confirmation. On the Court of Appeals for a little over a year, Thomas has not written any opinions on major issues.
Those who are concerned with individual rights are going to have to focus more and more on the legislative process.
Thomas's views on abortion, the death penalty, freedom of speech and religion, and other politically charged issues are not as well known as his views on affirmative action. But should he fulfill administration expectations, his votes on these issues could make the Supreme Court more conservative than at any time in recent memory. Tim O'Brien, ABC News at the Supreme Court.
The confirmation proceedings on Judge Thomas will likely begin in September before the Senate Judiciary Committee, which has a Democratic majority. There is no more important a nomination that the president makes. On Capitol Hill tonight, ABC's Jim Wooten.
It's a tricky nomination for liberals, especially black liberals like Benjamin Hooks, head of the NAACP. He denied having already decided to oppose Judge Thomas, but his judicious reaction suggested serious reservations.
We wanted to see an African-American appointed in Mr. Marshall's place, but one who embodied many of his ideals, and that is what we'll be studying the record for.
White liberals, like Democrat Metzenbaum of Ohio, who's on the Judiciary Committee, simply focused on Judge Thomas's views on abortion.
I think we're entitled to a direct, categorical answer from Clarance Thomas if he hopes to be confirmed for the Supreme Court of the United States.
I can't imagine any reason to vote against this man.
Republican Hatch of Utah, also on the Judiciary Committee, echoed the president's endorsement of Thomas.
Now, is he going to be a right-wing ideologue? No. I guarantee you he will not be that. Will he be a left-wing ideologue? No. I guarantee you he will not be that.
Democrat DeConcini, also on the committee, said Thomas could expect a lively hearing, but probably no real damage.
I'll have questions with him certainly in the area of the Equal Protection Clause, the 14th Amendment as relates to women, but my guess is, or speculation is, that he will be confirmed.
Well, that's the early line on the hearings for Judge Thomas. Testy and boisterous and tough probably for him and for those who oppose him. But in the end, a recommendation to the Senate that he be confirmed to succeed Justice Marshall. Peter?
Well, take us a little beyond the early nine, Jim. You, based on the record today and what you've been hearing, you think he'll be confirmed?
Well, I think so, mainly because civil rights groups are going to be put in such a bind on this man that their opposition to him, while genuine, may be termed as ineffective. After all, they understand that behind him is no other black ready to be appointed by President Bush.
Okay, Jim, thanks very much. Tim O'Brien is also standing by. Tim, based on the fact that he hasn't got much of a paper record, what about the weight of the opinions of other judges and lawyers? What do you think?
It's very important, but it's not crucial. We have had judges confirmed before who were found unqualified by the American Bar Association. But the decision has been made, and I think the Senate Judiciary, they may listen to the ABA, but they're going to make their own call on this, and I would agree with Jim. I think that he stands a very good chance of being confirmed, despite a fight, and unless we get new disclosures.
Okay, Tim, thanks. Back up to Maine to ABC's Britt Hume, who is still standing by. Confidence high up there. Britt, do they see any downside in all this?
Well, Peter, the confidence is high, but they have no doubt here, the officials that I've spoken to, that there will be a fight, and they don't think it's by any means certain that he'll be confirmed. And one thing they are worried about is the American Bar Association Screening Committee giving him less than a top rating, which could give the opponents of the nomination something to work with, which they, at the moment, lack. Okay, Britt, thanks very much. As Jim Wooten said, that is at least the early line. In a moment, some of the other news. The new fiscal year finds many states without a budget and no authority to pay the bills. There is a stalemate for now in Yugoslavia, and the actor Michael Landon has died of cancer.
And the liver.